Welcome, Vorthos Nation, to the second episode of June's Storied Showdown. Today we have an exciting one for you. I sit down with Cary from the VorthosCast to discuss why they chose Rei Nakazawa's Kamigawa classic, Told in Whispers. In this interview, we had a blast talking about narrative deck building, our hopes for the future of character representation in the game, and the ways in which we interact with these stories even without realizing it. Today's episode is incredibly rich in lore, great company, and plenty of things unspeakable. So as always, and without any further ado or without gilding the lily, please enjoy part 2 of this month's Storied Showdown.
The earth will tremble hard as he approaches. The ground will shake at the sound of clicking claws. The universe is wider than we know it. He holds our planet in his mighty paws.
What story did you choose for this challenge? And I'm curious to know what drew you to it.
The story I chose for the challenge was Told in Whispers by Rei Nakazawa. This was a piece of web fiction released during Champions of Kamigawa, kind of like the original, not the original, because I won't rob early 90s duelist internet story articles of their credit, but like the original modern effort of web fiction for Magic. And it was just like, hey, we've got these creative team people and they want to go off and do a whole bunch of what were called then the Kamigawa vignettes across the 3 sets. And most of them are like, I'm going to lock onto a legend, I'm going to tell a damn good story about that legend, and then I'm going to move on. And Ray did an excellent job throughout all of these, like good chunk of creative writing credit there.
I agree. Was this your first time reading Ray's piece, or had you read it previously and kind of got drawn back to it for this?
I read it previously and got it drawn back to for this challenge. There are so many very, very well-known stories within like the modern catalog of Magic story now, especially post March of the Machines. There's a whole bunch of bangers that people keep going up to, but also post Magic Origins. And so my interest was very much getting something prior to those landmarks to see like, hey, maybe somebody will see this deck, hear me talking about this story, and go read this story themselves. But yeah, so this one I had read around 2019, I think, when I was first cataloging stories for my site. I had read all the Kamigawa vignettes. Some of them are better than others. Ray's really stood out, but there's a companion piece to this one that's also focused on the same character called It Is Everything by Gwendolyn Kestrel.
Okay.
And it is Azami's origin story. And it is a very, very short piece by comparison to this and by comparison to a lot of the stories that were published at the time. But really, really solid one. This one just has the better thematic ties for making a full deck around.
All right.
But
for those who haven't read the story, how would you summarize the emotional or thematic core of the story?
it's very classical, unknowable horror short story. It does have a little bit of a twist, a very soft twist that kind of feels tame by comparison of the standards of like modern speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy writing. However, when Magic nails these, they nail them very well, and it kind of stands the test of time. And this is one of those example pieces where it's like, yes, I've seen this structure before in non-Magic fiction. However, this one does it in a very fun way that ties into the cards, that serves the story and the world of Kamigawa, and kind of, as we'll probably get into later, but goes into or teases a final thread that is like feeding into the Kami War that is going on at the time during the main storyline fiction. The theme of it is loosely that classical unknowable horror, and then a insatiable thirst for knowledge on like two different axes, because you have the main character Kaguya and you have Azami, and they're operating on entirely different wavelengths, but they're both going for the same exact kind of culmination of power.
Yeah, like a good, like you'd want any good buddy cop scenario to have, you know?
Yeah.
So you kind of, we talked about how it kind of has a very similar structure to a lot of media that people might already be familiar with. But for this specifically, were there particular characters or moments or settings that kind of break away from that structure, or that just called to you specifically?
Having one of Magic's greatest strengths is being able to adapt those things in unique ways, and having the unknowable horror kind of be like this kami of forbidden knowledge that is represented by, in the set itself and in the block itself, like these arcane spells. And it's just like, we want to get more of that knowledge. We want to dip into more of that. And having that be the delineation line, like, it's not this alien knowledge. It is just like really this spiritual knowledge that exists on the other side of the veil of Kamigawa. And if we can tap into that, maybe we'll be able to thwart the kami in the end. But very, very dangerous means to get to there. So I think Azami plays into the twist backstabby character pretty well, as far as like taking a gleeful satisfaction. And again, as emphasized in the other story, everything, she's ruthless. Like, she is not feeling any pity for these people. She has softly led them to this fate specifically so that she can have access to little drips of kami knowledge and see if she's able to use that to turn the tide. But like, even that kind of motivation at the end of the story, when she's like, we could turn the tide of the kami war in favor of the humans of Kamigawa, that's not really her. Like, not saying that she's not being truthful in that moment, but she's doing it because it's the forbidden knowledge, because she wants everything in the world to be hers.
Now, did you see any real world parallels or even personal experiences that made this story kind of resonate with you? Or was it just the really, really solid storytelling?
I think the solid storytelling. I think I've been attracted to kind of lore glutton characters. Vronos was my first one. Vronos was like kind of went planeswalking on behalf of Abyssinian Church, and then for Esper to kind of gain this otherworldly knowledge and bring it back to them to be recorded. Didn't end up too well for him, but any character who gives in to that urge of like, I could have it all. Like, I could really have everything and know everything and kind of be at the cutting edge, as long as I like tap into this unrestrained potential. No personal attachment there.
Sure.
My site and all my other work is purely for fun. I don't take any
no worries,
sadistic joy in it. But
I do understand what you're saying, that insatiable sort of desire or almost lust, if you will, for just like the profane knowledge and
even like Kaguya's kind of childlike curiosity, like,
is
the world exactly as it seems? Because it doesn't seem like it is, and it definitely isn't. But like, does Master Hisoka know that? Probably not. Does Lady Azami know that? Definitely. Like, she's the one pulling the strings here. She's behind the grand conspiracy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So when we talk about Magic the Gathering, one of the main concepts, one of the main through lines through every set is the idea of color identity, color mattering to abilities, mechanics, characters, sometimes depending on the plane, the actual magic involved, right? So when you were reading this story, I'd like to think of this outside of the realm of cards. So if you had to assign the story itself a color identity, what do you think the color identity of the story itself would be?
It's a little bit black for the deceit, like black aligned.
Yeah.
There's layered deception going on. You have to hide things to purposefully to be discovered, and then hide things to actually not be discovered. So, yeah, despite how overwhelmingly blue all the character motivations are within the story, there is like a tinge of greed, a tinge of selfishness, and deception behind Azami's actions.
Yeah. Okay. I like that a lot. And it's interesting when you look at the characters, when you read the story, how, I don't know, I started thinking about this concept. I started thinking about this specific concept when I came up with the idea for this series, and the idea that the story itself can have a completely different color identity to the cards that you're actually using for the deck, right?
Yeah.
And that's always been fascinating to me, that you can tell, we can use cards of different colors, of different mechanics, of different abilities, all to tell the same story. And if you put all of it together, it might actually end up equaling a different color identity, if you will.
There's plenty of stories that are so heavily emotionally driven, besides the fact that there are white and green and blue and black characters in it. It's like so many stories are pulling on those emotional strings that a lot of stuff tends to lead red, but this one thankfully leaned in a little bit more interesting direction. I think a lot of modern Magic web fiction kind of falls into that, where it's like you're exploring pretty deep or doing pretty deep investigation of relationships in the side stories. So yeah.
I think that's one of the main reasons I've always really been drawn to the side stories. As a fan of the world building specifically, I've always really loved the side stories and how much more depth we get to characters that you would never know even exist if you only read the mainline, arc. So that's really nice. When you started building this deck, when you read the story, when you agreed to do this, when you started building the deck, I'm curious to know where you began. Did you begin with the named characters? Did you begin with the mechanics, with the vibe? Did you begin solely with the set itself?
The set itself, and then narrow down to specifically. I tried going for the Unspeakable first. The Unspeakable is kind of the titular character that is being evoked throughout the entire story. Not specifically named, despite like given a nickname or whatever. But Unspeakable's 9 mana. We're not getting that out anytime soon, Chief. Like there's absolutely nothing by comparison. Like even when you look back at the original Commander sets, you have like Vishkal, you have Teriel, where it's like those are 7 mana big chunkers, and they immediately did something when on the board. And I'm sorry, but the Unspeakable to its credit, Flying Trampler. However, it gets back arcane spells, and there's, thanks to what I believe is called parasitic design, they didn't want to exactly jive with arcane spells a second time around for Neon Dynasty or any set in the time since. I believe there's been a few added to the game in like Modern Horizons type sets, but there was not a meaningful number of arcane spells to justify going full Unspeakable route, and there wasn't enough Unspeakable juice on its own.
Sure.
So
and it would have been mono blue, right? So yeah.
And so it didn't change that much, because it's like I can still do an Azami deck, but specifically have the Unspeakable in there. And thankfully they gave us a much more playable version, because for Kamigawa Neon Dynasty they did saga cards that are based off quite a number of those original Kamigawa vignettes. So that one is significantly more playable by comparison. It's still pretty casually oriented, but at the same time, Azami gives a lot more direction for like wizard pupils, figuring out who else would be in the school, kind of fleshing out school identity, the wizarding spells identity. And then from there, I specifically was like, we can do Kamigawa stuff, And then beyond that is like the play neutral stuff. I
Mhm.
don't want to have Drolf. I don't want to have I don't know, Rivendell. Like
Sure, yeah.
there's a lot of powerful options that are allowed to us in the modern day, but maybe it should be more true to story and a little
Yeah.
bit more
They say
less
restriction.
immersion breaking even for myself.
Yeah,
I'm
and they
playing
say
it.
restriction breeds creativity. So, one of the main things I've been most excited about is, um, just seeing how creative these decks are when people are restricting themselves to, a specific story or set to build around. It can get really interesting, and sometimes synergies you didn't expect to exist are right there, and you would have never seen them beforehand.
And there's like a
Um,
little tinge of the story is about kind of tricking these other people into accessing untold knowledge. So maybe since we're all playing relatively lower power casual decks that are themed around specific stories, maybe I can give other people the advantage by making everybody draw cards. And it's like, sure, somebody might be going off, but somebody else might have drawn 5 cards off my spell also and been
Yeah.
able to have answers to it. And I'm mono blue, so I'm very limited in answers. I'm not doing enchantments. I'm not doing artifacts by and large, like
yeah.
kind of utility box for other people to spring from.
Yeah. When you were building this deck, were there any major and I know that the vignettes aren't super long, so you don't have a novel's worth of, pages to pull from, but were there any scenes or characters or moments that you really were hoping to capture in card form? And if so, were you able to find any of those for this deck?
In card form, I would say like Azami is pretty sufficient on her own.
Oh, yeah.
For being like, you tap down the wizard, you're kind of keeping it in this exhausted state specifically so that you can sap its knowledge from it. So that one's kind of a flavor build in itself. Other stuff that was kind of tangential, we had Behold the Unspeakable that actually gets the unspeakable out. Less obvious stuff, you had I have Exhaustion in there. Exhaustion is like one of my favorite pet cards. It is truly you're going off too fast, we're gonna play a little bit of a time warp to catch up for the rest of us. It doesn't fully knock them out of the game. They're still able to defend, they're still able to attack if they have untapped stuff, but finding weird adaptations of that was a little bit of a challenge, because you kind of start dipping into, am I going to go, I have Fractured Sanity in there.
Yeah.
The useful card. It plays in with Arcane Heist. Arcane Heist is a very fun card. And it's even arcane, so it's technically like Kami magic when you get into the thick of it. But yeah, I didn't want it to be too optimized at sub-theme level specifically for that, so I was trying to stay away from I'm gonna curse you.
Yeah.
Your sanity will erode and your library will erode and will mill you out for the end of the game. So still trying to give people option. Minds Aglow also taps into that kind of shared knowledge.
With that being said, did you find elements of the story or story beat specifically hard to translate into deck form? And if so, kind of how did you work around that? Is you working around that kind of expansion into the sort of neutral card zone?
Yeah, exactly. There's not many, despite how wizard school the actual story is, there's not that many other wizards, and there's not many other mentions of specific subtypes of magic or that kind of stuff. So it's we kind of get into the utility box of Commander of I should have counter spells as some kind of answer. I should kind of be flexible in those. There's a whole bunch of themes that I love. I love sleep effects, tap and don't untap. That kind of seemed to evoke the story.
Yeah.
There's the issue with those is sleep is a very good one. It's not especially flavorful for translating to the story, but it's pretty solid in its mechanical effect. All of the other ones like that are even less tied to the thing. They're either specifically tied to another plane, or they're specifically tied to D&D, tied to some other property, and it's like, I don't want to do Cone of Cold as much as I want to be rolling dice here. It's fun to find all of those kind of niches, and it's like there aren't a whole bunch of things that I can do to like necessarily tap down my own pupil to keep him tapped and keep like draining knowledge from him. It's pretty much just Azami untap, tap, untap, tap, like kind of doing that kind of ritual.
Yeah.
So not as much like feeding off of my own creatures as necessarily would happen in the story.
Sure. Now, when you were, it sounds like you put a lot of thought into balancing, kind of staying true to the story, but making a deck that still plays well in a commander game. And that's honestly, that's really impressive, and it's also really hard to do. I have found like there are a lot of challenges that kind of are associated with that. Some stories lead you down a path pretty easily, with main characters and stuff like that. But sometimes the main character of this specific side story or whatever didn't get a card, and so that can kind of create this obstacle in your path. Is this how you would normally approach your deck building, or is this or how is this process different from a normal Cary signature deck?
It's pretty close to how I approach it. Like, I kind of veer away from universes beyond cards in general. Like, I'm not an absolute purist about it. I think I have a reprieve in a mono white deck because it's just good. Good color bending fun for people to encounter. But yeah, I don't go into a lot of my decks thinking like this is the character. I should try to have everything from a singular plane. But I do heavily think about thematics and whether other people are going to have fun playing against it, because I come from a very specific angle of Commander where it's like I'm still stuck in the 2013, 2014. I want battle cruiser, I want long games. Plane chase is optional, but I want it to be kind of facilitating a conversation more than I want it to be necessarily a game. Doing these kind of events, like doing any kind of streamed or video content, does necessitate that there's not too much cross-talking or games going too long. Sure. However, it's all like Magic as a game I see is still like facilitating conversations between friends. It's not necessarily like I'm looking to win, and most times I'm not necessarily looking to win, so maybe that's not too different from this one. I do have ways to win in this one. I could set up specific card combos because I wanted to make sure we don't durdle for too long if we're just kind of getting board clutter and it's kind of getting unreadable for
I've seen some of the other decks. I don't think we'll have much of a problem durdling, so
yes. I figured kind of accelerate up to a point and then try to keep people in check.
No, but I love that, and honestly I don't think I don't think I expected much of a different answer, to be honest with you. As the operator of mtglore.com, I would be a little bit confused if you weren't kind of focusing at least a little bit on flavor when you're building your Magic decks.
I love Cube. I love so many other formats.
So good. Yeah.
But there is something specific about EDH being kind of this expression of your own creativity, and a lot of people take that. The climate has accelerated quite a bit to the point where people are like, you have to run mana rocks. I'm sorry, but I have to run mana rocks in order to get out of turn 5 Azami, even maybe turn 4 optimistically. But besides that, like, I'm still trying to have games that go until turn 7, turn 8, turn 9, turn 10. Like, that's my optimistic range of like when something can end.
Hey, you're talking to a registered durdler here. Okay, some of the best games I've ever played were 2.5-3 hours long.
And I never mind that is the thing.
No, Me either. Me
Yeah.
either. My favorite board game of all time is Twilight Imperium, and that I have legitimately played an 8.5 hour long game of that before. So I live for that. I love just spending time with people, having good conversation, and relishing over the things that we're doing together. So with that being said, we talk about playing long games. We talk about the climate changing to be shorter games. And some of that has to do with people kind of moving into a more competitive space, or more competitive people moving into this once casual, I'll put that in quotes, space. But do you think that storytelling still has a place in gameplay? We already kind of know that flavor is important for you when playing Commander specifically. But in general, do you think that storytelling has its place in gameplay?
I think yes. I think I won't nail it down to like the easy, like people are pushing back against Universes Beyond, so that proves that they care about the Magic multiverse way more than they've shown historically for decades
Right.
up to this point.
Right.
However, like people still care about even down to minor creative flavorings of their cards. Like if they're running a commander deck that is focused on a specific character, then they're usually going to look up either flavor text or art tags on Scryfall for those characters and see what kind of stuff they can jam in. Like we're kind of in a different environment. People aren't playing Blind Seer, Jank Commander to represent Urza and like running all the Weatherlight artifacts under original Gerard Capation. Like they have options provided to them now. Modern Horizons, Urza, like all these reprinted characters that would otherwise kind of, well, reprinted as in like recarded necessarily. Sisay is a lot more powerful, arguably, than the original Sisay, and works better as like the
a little bit, yeah.
Weatherlight commander. Yeah, exactly. So I think finding those kind of avenues has become easier because people can have more playable connections to the cards. Like if there was an Azami card that was probably 3-costed, I would play it probably regardless of whether its flavor was necessarily as one-to-one direct with the storytelling. Minamo got destroyed though, and so I assume she's dead. We'll see in some future set or might hear about it. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential to be had in individual choices. I think full out thematic is still relatively uncharted territory.
Sure. We saw Wizards dip into that a little bit with the Archenemy drop that kind of forces you and your play group to play out a story of sorts,
and getting to like adopt the personas of necessarily like here's the Gatewatch side, here's the Nicobolas side, fight it out, which
honestly I bought the product. I like it. I like it. I would totally be down to see them do it again.
And getting that outside of like Commander specifically rocks for this kind of thing because it's like you get to have the person. Commander doesn't have all the options because Planeswalkers can't be commanders. Yeah. So a lot of these hallmark characters are still kind of locked into weird spaces of like you have to represent them with something else if you wanted to make a deck necessarily about that character. Yeah. So,
but for new players who are playing on Arena, for example, you can play Brawl, which is a 100-card commander, but Arena rules let you pick a Planeswalker to be your commander, which is cool, but also I could see leading to some issues.
I won't get into my tangent, but like
okay, yeah, there
aren't a whole bunch of Planeswalkers that I feel are broken as commanders versus the kind of engines we currently have being printed. It's like, I'm sorry, but there's probably no Planeswalker that is gonna be better than the Sultai Dragon.
Oh no.
I'm sorry, you're not planeswalking out of a whole horde of zombies. Like, yeah, that's just kind of where we're at. So
I agree. So as we kind of move to the end of this, I'm curious to know if there are other Magic stories that you'd like to turn into a deck someday. I don't know if this is the first time you've ever done this specific thing, picking a story and building a deck around it. on its own. It doesn't seem like it would be. It seems totally reasonable that you have done this before. But on the off chance that you haven't, are there any other Magic stories that you'd consider doing this again?
I haven't technically done this before. I did do pretty thematic Jace deck back around like 2016, 2017. That was decently optimized as you could reasonably get, kind of limiting yourself to what is in Jace's repertoire as a character.
Yeah.
Getting into specific like story specific deck building, there are a lot of options, but unfortunately so many of them are even less served by plane agnostic stuff, where it's like less served by having a commander in the first place, because it's like there's a ton of anthology stories that I want people to read, but they have no tie to the cards. So it's like, do I give you this one that has no emotional, like no tie to a physical object that you have, but is really, really good? Or do I give you like, the safe Wasatora story that is like solid, but also ties to a card, so it gives you that double punch action? Yeah. So, and even then, like, how many of the things in the Wasatora story could be truthfully adapted to a deck building type situation? Like,
yeah,
a decent number, but not as many as you'd like, because there's like a horde of cat dragons, and we don't exactly have hordes of cat dragons to kind of get into the deck necessarily outside of the ones that she creates. So yeah, there's a long list of stories that I would love to, even if not directly adapt, then thematically adapt. And I think that's even more of a restrictive challenge.
Absolutely.
But in casual spaces, it's more than possible to just kind of slap those cards together and run them.
I love that. And just real quick, I just have two last questions. The first one, gonna be super fast. We know that for the upcoming Spider-Man set, that Wizards is going to be modifying the Spider-Man cards to fit into in-universe cards and characters to portray on Arena. As someone who has explored the elder stories, if you will, to a degree that I know I haven't, and I know a lot of other people haven't, can you give us like maybe 2 or 3 characters that you like, that you love from stories that don't already have a card, that that you would at least be excited to see in card form, even if it has, you know, a Spider-Man lineage to it?
Yeah, so there is... So this runs into the whether I think they need to be truthfully adapting.
Yeah, I think for the sake of this, it's not truthfully adapting. Maybe it's just a character that you liked so much from a story that never got a card, and so at the very least, this is them getting to see the face of that card.
Mubin was one of my picks in my tweet. Mubin is a Rox character from Alara Unbroken. Yeah. Kind of Rafiq's bestie throughout the story. No spoilers, however, kind of a tragic character in that block. And like, there's a Rhino in there. I don't care if it's a Rhino villain necessarily. It's a Rhino character, so it's like close enough to where it's like you're going to have the legendary slot for it. I don't necessarily care. You can give it the Patrick Star treatment, where it's like, is Barktooth Warbeard Patrick Star? Like, he's a human, so no, they should have given him Starfish type, I believe, if that's available in the game still. But they wanted to reskin him as like a goofy card, so they reskinned him as a goofy card, and it's like, it's not that much of a crime in my mind. And I honestly, not to encourage any kind of bad activity, but like, if you want to do universes within things, just do them. Like, I have a few projects in the work that I won't like commit to talking about until they're actually out, but it's like, just do proxies of characters that you want to see, or characters that you connect to. If it's a side character, if I wanted to have Kujia be specifically Snapcaster Mage, I could print it out on my home printer, and that could be the truth for my deck, and nobody would care otherwise because I have the original Snapcaster Mage if you want to like have me play that instead. But I think a lot of that specifically very narrow, like I want to gush about this deck, I'm enthusiastic about this story, like you should be very, very, very free to do it, because I won't say no offense, people won't notice whether it was a secret lair or not. But like there's a lot of cards in Magic. People are not keeping track of them. So you might as well tune your stuff out to be like to your personalized taste, rather than kind of waiting forever to see whether Magic gets around to giving it a proper adaptation.
Finally, last question, and then I'll let you go. What do you hope that people take away from this episode about your story or your deck, or just the process of connecting lore and gameplay?
That I am not the threat and they shouldn't attack me. That more serious answer, I think that getting to do this kind of deck building restriction is an extremely, extremely satisfying, whether you're doing it on spell table, whether you're doing it like actually assembling the deck in paper, whether you're doing it on some kind of online platform where you don't necessarily need to commit as much financially to playing the deck that you would otherwise build in paper for X number of dollars. It feels very good as a deck building experiment, and it will crack you out of whatever funk you have for like, do I want to build another overtuned commander deck that does this specific thing? Like, see if your playgroup wants to do this. If your playgroup reads Magic Story, or if you want to encourage them to read Magic Story, you can just give them stories and be like, hey, we're gonna tabletop sim this and see what you guys build, and if somebody brings something busted, so be it. But at the same time, like, just have fun and experiment with Magic Story, because it is a very, very rich vein for you to find both emotional connection and that kind of deck building connection that kind of gets lost in the day-to-day of how people talk about Commander.